Welcome back to Dark Corner's Horror Smackdown. We love all these films, but not everyone does. So in round 3, we're playing Devil's Advocate. Views expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of Dark Corners or its affiliates. Match 50, Godzilla vs. Horror of Dracula. On the face of it, the worst thing about 1954's Godzilla is that it led not just to 1998's Godzilla, not just to Son of Godzilla and Jet Jaguar, but to a whole slew of giant monster films made in the US and Japan, some intentionally more comedy than tragedy, some unintentionally more comedy than tragedy, but none with anywhere near the depth and resonance of their illustrious forebear. But while that is the film's fault, it is not a fault with the film. The problem with Godzilla, for a modern audience at least, is evident from the title character's first appearance. However good the actors are, however affecting and compelling the suffering of the Japanese people is, we want to see Godzilla. He's the name on the marquee. But the film's budget and the level of technology being used makes seeing him a mixed blessing. The close-ups are usually fleeting glimpses because when the camera lingers, it runs the risk of the monster looking almost comical. So we see Godzilla mostly in long shot, or in the dark. But even then, there's no hiding the creases in the monster suit. And the puppet used for the extreme long shots looks like a different creature altogether. Worst of all, the constricting suit leaves Godzilla with a very limited range of movement, making him seem stilted and awkward. In a film that seeks to make a science fiction situation real, its most unrealistic element is front and center. Can you take the film and its tragic content seriously when you don't buy its central element? With its subject matter recalling and referencing events not yet a decade old, Godzilla is very much of its time, and the personal connection those audiences felt to the situation being depicted was enough to gloss over any deficiencies in its effects. But to a modern eye, without those raw and recent memories on which to draw, is it simply dated? The fact that Hammer's Horror of Dracula has made it this far into the Horror Smackdown by default suggests that it is the greatest Dracula film ever made. And yet, in almost every respect, it is a terrible adaptation, trading off the character names and lore in service of a greatly simplified story. There is no Renfield, an important character in the Dracula mythos. The story leaps over the sea voyage and, despite the pronounced English accents from all the cast, the action never seems to move more than 3 hours from Klausenburg.
We don't get many travellers in these parts. Not that stop, anyway.
We never get to see Dracula shapeshift. Instead, he escapes the pursuing Van Helsing in a horse and carriage.
You think Dracula killed that coachman? Of course he did.
The equivalent today would be the climax of a vampire film being a car chase in a stolen taxi. We just expect more from the Count. Jonathan Harker is a radically different character. Instead of visiting the castle to provide legal support for a real estate transaction, he's there to kill Dracula.
I will forever end this man's reign of terror.
Given all the radical changes the filmmakers made from the novel, it's a mystery why they would leave the wholly uncinematic, diary-reading voiceover intact.
And all seemed normal, but for one thing. There were no birds singing.
Despite Harker's plans to kill the Count, when given the opportunity he folds and is transformed into one of the living dead, and shortly thereafter is killed by Van Helsing, vanishing from the story completely. Poor adaptation aside, there's no denying that Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee deliver masterful performances, even if those in the tavern do not.
I remember the gentleman. He gave me a letter to post.
Hold your tongue, girl.
And this late injection of comic relief in the build-up to the final confrontation feels woefully misjudged. At times the film sways wildly into melodrama, accentuated by an overly dramatic score, especially when the Count enters the scene. Which is pretty much all Christopher Lee gets to do for the majority of the film. If you think that Lee's towering presence alone would be enough to strike fear into the audience without the aid of a whole orchestra leaping into action, you would be right. But The Horror of Dracula is not a film that goes for subtlety. Let us know what you think of these criticisms. Are they fair? Did we miss anything out? Most importantly, let us know which films should move on into the next round.